and welcome to part 8 of our 5 tips series. This week, our focus is on intellectual property audits, or IP audits for short. I'm sure that we are all familiar with traditional financial audits, but IP audits are just as important for businesses to both protect their intangible assets and also to help value these assets. For those who may not be familiar with what intellectual property is, it's the expressed creations of the mind. So you can have intellectual property subsisting in your inventions, in the name of your business, or if you have a logo that you use in conjunction with your business, where you have a secret recipe or a unique way of doing something. All of these fall under the grand heading of intellectual property. Persons who create literary, artistic, or dramatic works such as paintings, music, films, or plays also have intellectual property subsisting in their work. We are constantly and sometimes unknowingly surrounded by intellectual property. This is part 8 of our 5 tips series, where I'll be sharing 5 tips each week that are helpful for businesses, small to medium-sized entities, artists, innovators, designers, photographers, filmmakers, and essentially anyone who has an idea and wants to create and protect it. I'll be sharing tips on how to level up and take your business or craft to the next stage, and most importantly, protect what you create. These tips were formulated from common questions I am asked and also from real-life client issues. If you missed the previous parts, be sure to check it out on our YouTube channel, Terita Kalu Law. Last week, we dealt with non-disclosure agreements, and we highlighted the importance of doing an IP audit before entering into these agreements. Many times, businesses are not aware of IP they may have or may have lapsed in protecting their IP. Sometimes, they may realize that they are not maximizing the use of its IP, or that they don't have proper systems or policies in place to ensure that their IP stays protected. It is therefore useful to businesses to conduct these audits on a regular basis to ensure maximum protection and benefits. There are different types of IP audits, but our focus today will be on general purpose IP audits. Here are my tips for conducting an IP audit. Tip number 1. Ensure all IP is protected. The first place to start when conducting your IP audit is, of course, to identify what intellectual property you have subsisting in your business. Get familiar with the different types of intellectual property and look at whether the IP you have is protected in the best way. There can be more than one type of IP subsisting in the same work or good, and so when conducting your audit, check to see whether all types of protection available is actually being utilized to protect the work or good. I'm going to use my example from part 7 of this series, our BlueCam 1 invention, that is essentially a Bluetooth webcam with better resolution than all other webcams. The technology in BlueCam 1 can be protected by a patent. The name BlueCam 1 can be protected by a trademark. The design of the webcam, if there's a unique design, can be protected by industrial design. And certain aspects of it that is not patentable can be protected by trade secret. There's definitely a lot of intellectual property subsisting in this one product. When conducting an audit on my business, I will have to check and ensure that I have utilized every available type of IP protection for it and that they are all valid. The trademark has been renewed and is still valid, the patent annuity payment has been paid, the industrial design has been renewed and valid, and the trade secret is properly protected. It is also important to determine the owner in each type of IP and ensure all rights belong to the company. If, for example, my trademark was designed by a graphic artist who is an independent graphic artist, in my IP audit, I would need to check and see whether the graphic designer assigned the rights to the graphics to my company or whether I don't in fact own the copyright subsisting in the trademark, and thus my company is exposed. These are the types of vulnerabilities an IP audit can highlight. Tip number 2, review all agreements. It is important to identify and assess the adequacy of relevant provisions in all agreements that concern the protection of intellectual property. The types of agreements that will be relevant would be licenses. Is the company in compliance with the terms of any licenses they may have? Is it valid? Does it need renewing? Also, has the company given any licenses to any companies? And are these licenses in order? Another type of agreement that would be relevant would be any assignment agreement. So, as mentioned in tip number 1, are the necessary rights assigned to the company? Does the company own the rights that they need to? The most important type of agreement you should look at in your IP audit is your employment agreements and any agreements with independent contractors. In our Bluecam 1 invention, if an independent contractor assisted with developing the Bluecam technology, you need to look at the agreements in place to determine who owns the invention and whether there has been any transfer of rights. It is extremely important to know what rights you have and don't have to ensure there's no infringement on a third party's rights and to ensure that no one infringes on your rights. It is important when you're looking at your employment contracts and any agreements with staff that you ensure proper clauses are put in place to protect any trade secrets or confidential information of your business. Your trade secrets are only valuable as long as it is kept secret, so these agreements are essential to protecting your IP. Tip number 3, examine collaborations. Many businesses collaborate for many different reasons, and it is always important when conducting an IP audit to examine the agreements with companies to determine who owns what IP and to ensure that you have all the necessary approvals to use any IP in the collaboration. This is critical to examine as using another person or company's IP without the necessary approval in writing can result in legal proceedings against you. It is also important to examine as you need to ensure that if you are collaborating with any business and that they are using your IP, that the proper restrictions on use are put in place to control how they use it. For example, if they have permission to use your brand, you need to have proper provisions in the agreement to ensure that they don't use it in a way that can tarnish your brand. Another instance is where you collaborate with another company to create a new invention. You would need to examine your agreements to determine each party's rights and responsibilities under this collaboration with respect to the IP subsisting in it. Tip number 4, detect any infringement. This aspect of the IP audit goes both ways. Firstly, you want to look at what IP you own and determine if anyone is infringing on your IP rights. And secondly, on an IP audit, you may discover that you don't own rights that you are using, which could give rise to infringement claims against you. An IP audit clearly outlines IP that a company owns, and so the company can get a clearer picture of what they have rights to. Many businesses, and I see this happen somewhat often in Trinidad and Tobago, they have intellectual property rights and they are not even aware of it. So other companies use their IP and infringe on their rights. Some persons take it as a compliment when others use their work, but in fact, these people need permission to do so. For example, if your company produces images used for marketing, you may have copyright rights subsisting in your work. When other persons or companies then take that and use it for their business, this is a clear infringement of your rights. The IP audit can help to pinpoint your rights and so that you can maximize on it and prevent others from using it without your permission. However, in the situation where the images produced by your company actually contains work you probably found on the internet, the chances are high that then you are probably infringing on someone else's work. And I see it all too often happen here in Trinidad and Tobago. Some persons assume that if work is easily available online, it's free to use. However, this opens up your company to infringement actions, and so when doing the IP audit, look for any possible infringements because this can save you significantly from costly litigation in the future. Tip number 5. Identify key IP assets. After conducting your IP audit, you may discover that you have a lot more intellectual property assets in your business than you initially thought. It is therefore important to identify the key IP subsisting in your business. What IP assets are crucial to your business? These are the assets you need to focus on and determine firstly, is it as protected as it could be? As we discussed in tip number 1, there are many different types of IP you can use to protect something. For the key IP assets, you want to ensure that you protect them in as many ways as possible. Another important consideration when you have identified your key assets is to determine whether you are properly exploiting them. IP assets can be used and monetized in so many different ways. When you discover what your key assets are, you can formulate a plan to use it to the business's advantage. You can license it, use it for merchandising, maybe explore franchising. These methods can help to increase revenue and strengthen your business recognition. It is hard to maximize the assets of your business when you don't know what they actually are. It is always easier to benefit from tangible assets as you can easily see them right there in front of you. But sometimes the real value of a company lies in what is not seen, in its intangible assets. It is only in conducting the IP audit that you can get a better understanding of what these assets are and their worth to the company, and then begin to properly use them to your advantage. Those are our 5 tips for today, and I hope they were helpful and can get you on track for conducting your IP audit. Next week, I'll be discussing a very important and relevant topic for our current times. I'll be sharing 5 tips for managing your brand's social media presence. Many brands recently have suffered due to social media posts, not just from the brand itself, but also from employees closely linked with the brand. I'll be sharing tips for companies and businesses to implement to help protect their brand's reputation on social media. Be sure to tune in. Until next time.